Okay, guys, it worked. So this one was saved, so I don't have to repeat this one. Thank God, because I got a little frustrated. Okay, we're on page 177 of the study guide, and if you think about it, this study guide goes all the way for FDA, Consumer Product Safety Commission, all the way through page 192. So from 177 to 192, 15 pages of information. Now I put most of that stuff on that one page. Now it's one page. There's obviously much more stuff that's on the exam. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that one page. We're going to elaborate on a couple of topics. We're going to show you a couple of other scenarios that are just in the study guide. And we're going to show you where this stuff that was on that purple page that I just went over is in the study guide as well. And you can elaborate more from there. And then we'll go over the end of chapter 6 questions that are pretty good on the exam. All right. One page on page 178 of the study guide, it talks about the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 or the Wiley Act on the very bottom, page 178. This is where you need to know the formal and informal name. Now, on chapter 8, exam 3 for y'all, the formal and informal name of the Labor Acts is going to be significant, much more significant, and it's going to be something I cannot stress enough, kind of like the personal intentional torts from chapter 5. But just note the Wiley Act is the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. It talks about that as well. And right above that on page 178 of the study guide is the reason, because of the Spanish-American War and Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle. All right. Then at the very top of page 179, it talks about the creation of the FDA and the naming, renaming, and all that stuff as well. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 and the elixir sulfonamide is at the bottom of page 179. We have all that stuff as a result. So if he asks you a question that says, what was the main emphasis, the main reason why the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 was created? And then you're going to have the embalmed beef, the Spanish-American War, then you're going to have the Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle. Those are what caused the Pure Food and Drug Act to be created. The one that caused the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to basically take over for the Pure Food and Drug Act was that elixir sulfonamide thing where it killed hundreds of people in Tennessee. So note that that's on the bottom of page 179. On page 180, it talks a little bit at the top towards about the Kefauver-Harris Amendment. We'll talk. I think that's more later on in the study guide anyway, so we'll talk about that when we get there. In regards to anything on page 180, not too much there. Then on page 181 at the top, it led to the passage of the Delaney Clause, and it talks about food additives. Okay, so note that's the part right there with the Delaney Clause right there on page 181. We'll talk more about the food additives in just a little while. Let's see, you can skip all the way through page 182, haven't heard much there. 183, haven't heard much there. All the way down to bottom of page 184. On the bottom of page 184, it talks about the definition of a food additive. A food additive is any ingredient that is added to food that is not naturally occurring in that food or was naturally occurring but lost during the process of preparation in the production process. Okay? Now, it's called the Food Additives Amendment to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. That is more commonly known as the Delaney Clause. And this is something that I haven't added to, but I've talked about basically. You need to know what the Food Additives Amendment is. Another way to say this is the Delaney Clause. Now, that may be a multiple choice answer you need to know. It may be the Food Additives Amendment on one form. It may be the Delaney Clause on the other form. But the Delaney Clause, the Food Additive Amendment, what did it do? It provided a zero risk standard for food additives, okay, in food. They would cause no problems at all. Now, the problem associated to this is the red dye number 2. Now, I haven't talked about this, but we would have talked about it in the questions that we had at the very beginning of the review. Here is one question I'm going to go over now that gets a lot of people on the exam because they don't think through it a little bit. If I was to give you a question that said, which of the following products was removed by the FDA from the marketplace? And I was to give you A, red M&Ms, B, silicone breast implants, C, Bucky balls, Bucky cubes, D, lawn darts, E, all of the above. Well, he talked about 3 of those in his videos. Probably didn't maybe talk about buckyballs, bucky cubes, but it's a multiple choice. It's a thing in your study guide. A lot of people would have picked all of the above on that. Even if we didn't have the buckyballs, bucky cubes, you might have picked all of the above. The problem is you would have been wrong because I asked you, which of the following products was removed from the marketplace by the FDA? The FDA removed the silicone breast implants, so answer B would have been what you're looking for. The buckyballs or bucky cubes, or more importantly, the lawn darts, those were removed by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So the administrative agencies removed those. So if he asks you which of the following were removed by the federal administrative agency, then the answer is silicone breast implants, then it's maybe buckyballs, bucky cubes, and or lawn darts are all possible options. But which one was removed by the manufacturer itself was red M&Ms. Red M&Ms were removed because there was a Soviet report saying that red dye number 5 caused cancer. One, the report was inaccurate, but it got people to be scared crapless. And everybody assumed that because red M&Ms were using some type of red dye, it was red dye number 5. Even though red dye wasn't being used, and red dye number 5 wasn't being used in M&Ms, the manufacturers took the red M&Ms off the marketplace, and that is because they are worried about this Soviet report that was inaccurate to begin with, and they, how the public was. So even though they didn't use red dye, they took it off themselves, but it was the manufacturer that took it off, not an administrative agency. So he could phrase these questions each way. If he says, which of the following was removed by the FDA, silicone breast implants would be one. If it says which ones were removed by the Consumer Product Safety Commission, you're looking for lawn darts, maybe buckyballs, bucky cubes. Which ones were removed by the manufacturer, then it would be the red M&Ms, because the cancer-causing report that never really existed on a red dye, number 5, that was never even used. But if he says which ones were removed from the marketplace by, and then gives you a specific one, you need to know. If he just says which ones were removed from the marketplace at some point in time, then all of them were removed. If he says which ones were not removed by the administrative agencies, it'd be the one removed by the manufacturer, which should be the red M&Ms with the red dye number 5. Now, if he said in class or in a video, he has a little thing about what his favorite color red M&Ms was, and it's tan. The only reason I say that is a multiple choice answer may have something about tan M&Ms. In fact, one in the back of the study guide does say tan M&Ms. It's just Swim's way of saying that was my favorite color. And note that it has nothing to do with the red dye or anything like that on the exam. So that is that red dye and all that stuff with the food additives under the Delaney Clause issue was on page 184 and on the top of page 185. Then we have that Food Quality Protection Act, that very last 2 things on that very last thing in the study on the purple page, zero risk standard of no harm, and FDA's jurisdiction to include 9,000 pesticides. I would note that for this test, the pesticides portion, FDA's jurisdiction does include over 9,000 different pesticides because of the Food Quality Protection Act. And you'll notice in the study guide on page 185, it has acronyms. Acronyms are going to be big, especially on some of this stuff as well, but mainly on chapter 12 also and chapter 8. Okay, Nutritionally Labeling Education Act starts on the bottom of page 185. It basically F1, 2, and then on the next page over, 3, all give you information that I've already put into that purple packet, basically is right there. Now, talks about standard serving size and issues with standard serving size on middle of page 186. But at the very bottom, you have a breakfast cereal chart. What was interesting is someone was taking my tutoring semester, I don't know how many years ago, it was quite a few years ago. It was basically going from the old edition of the study guide to the newest edition of the study guide. And that summer, they basically were guinea pigs. They hadn't got the new edition yet, it wasn't ready, but he was starting to put all his questions and starting to put it together. So they had to handwrite everything that was not in the old study guide that was going to be in the new study guide. And one of those things was this rice checks, corn checks, wheat checks. They had to write it down. And they actually had a question on the exam. Now, I don't know how it's phrased. I don't really care. But if you think about it, it says standard serving size for most of the General Mills checks is typically 3/4 of a cup. That is what a standard serving size is. So he might ask a question, and then he says, how many grams is each one of those standard serving sizes? So if you look at that chart, basically he can ask you one of three ways of asking a question. Which of the following types of Chex cereal have larger amounts for a standard serving size? And that would be Rice Chex and Corn Chex, correct? He could ask you which has the least or most in terms of overall grams, the most being Wheat Chex at 47, the least being the Rice Chex at 27. The hardest question would be looking at that chart on page 186 and saying, which of the following is inaccurate about apple cinnamon chips? Now, I don't know how it's phrased. I don't know if that's even going to ask that. That kind of, is really hard for a lot of people, but it would be 3/4 of a cup is a standard serving size, which consists of 31 grams. I think it's going to be more, if you even have this question, would be which of the following are larger than 3/4 of a cup, or which one has the least or most amount of grams per standard serving size. All right. And it talks about standard serving size on the top page 187, 5 saltine crackers or a half a cup of ice cream. Who eats just 5 saltine crackers? I think, the standard serving size for Doritos is like 8 or 9. I don't understand how anybody thinks that only 8 or 9 are going to be eaten. But anyway, okay, on page 187 in the middle, it has the Kefauver-Harris Amendment. This is not only must a drug be safe for use, that was going to be legal or illegal, that's under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. But Kefauver-Harris says it must be also effective for use. As a result, for Kefauver-Harris to apply for drug approval, the FDA must have a drug be both safe and effective for use. For it to be effective for use, they're probably going to want, and safe for use, they're probably going to want years and years of data on side effects. And that's what we talked about, how drug approval of a drug takes over $250 million and a roughly average of 12 years to get drug approval under that formal trial-like hearing, because we may need to know 10 years worth of side effects, then go through the formal trial-like hearing. So you have the Kefauver-Harris Amendment extends how long it takes in terms of cost and how long it takes to get FDA approval of drug. Now, if he gives you a storyline scenario and basically says that the drug has no potential side effects, but does not do what is intended, what potential questions could come up from a storyline like that? One, it would violate the Kefauver-Harris under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. Okay, that Kefauver-Harris is the one that says $250 million or $250 million or 250 million and about an average of 12 years to complete. But then also, if it's not effective, if it doesn't get FDA approval, it won't be effective. And if it's not effective, and we say it's effective, then we have a potential false advertising and or fraud from a business intentional tort or personal intentional tort perspective from Chapter 5 as well that could come into play on a follow-up question on the exam or something like that. All right, as we go through the rest of the study guide on page 188 and 189, it talks about breast implants, silicone breast implants. The FDA took those off the marketplace for a long while before they were eventually found out to be safe for use. But FDA would have jurisdiction and has taken off silicone breast implants. Now, I don't know how you want to argue, is a silicone breast implant a food or a drug? I don't know. To me, it's probably both, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, on page 189 of the study guide, it talks a little bit about FDA and tobacco industry. I haven't heard about many of that stuff, but I know that was one of Obama's things that came about with during that portion as well. Okay, towards the end of Bush and Obama. Okay, now Consumer Product Safety Commission. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, we have about 5 or 6 things that we need to note for potential test questions on that. We've already talked about the Bucky balls, Bucky cubes, and or the lawn darts being removed. That'll be towards the very end. But here's what you need to know. The Consumer Product Safety Act in 1972 created the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Let's go through the Consumer Product Safety Commission. It ends with the word commission. Commission is going to be independent. It was created in 1972. That's a part of the socially conscious era. So we have an independent and socially conscious era. We know that. So we know the era and we know the independent versus dependent. It deals with consumer products that deal with household, recreational, or school use items. That could be a vacuum cleaner. That could be a car seat. That could be Febreze. That could be a bunch of different things. and therefore it crosses over a bunch of different industries. Therefore, the Consumer Product Safety Commission would best be described as an economy-wide administrative agency. And if you think about it, one of the things about the eras is much more the early ones in the early historical era would likely fall under much more industry specific. Not all of them, but much more industry specific. Whereas the ones later in the socially conscious era are much more towards economy-wide. The ones in the New Deal kind of go half and half. This is a general rule, not a specific rule, but a general rule that they're going to have. Okay? So we have the Consumer Product Safety Commission. It covers thousands of products in various different industries, children's toys, furniture, baby products, all that stuff. Okay? And then you have on the bottom of page 191, you have about 8 acts. 5 of them are on 191, 3 of them are on the next page over. Those acts all fall under the blanket umbrella of the Consumer Product Safety Commission under the Consumer Product Safety Act of 1972. So those were all ones. Now, has this been on exam before? I know he has a question because that same summer in between the study guide being recreated, y'all's is just basically, redone in font. It's really not been recreated other than a couple of changes. Okay, but in terms of all those acts, there was a question on those acts. You might want, if you're one of those note card oriented people, make a note card just giving you the act, maybe the acronym, and just what it does. I'm not sure you want to do that for a question material, but I do know on page 192, someone said the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act was one of their ones on their exam that one semester. Now, I haven't heard about it briefly, and I mean, it's self-explanatory if you get any of those 8, if you've memorized them, but I just want you to know there was a question on number 8, Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa, and then also those sweet checks, rice checks that we talked about earlier. Those were 2 of them that there's no way I could have prepared students at the time for. I can hopefully at least prepare you for. The last few things dealing with the Consumer Product Safety Commission that you need to know before we're done with chapter 6 is it basically is trying to notify the public of potential defects associated to bad products that would fall under the Consumer Product Safety Commission's jurisdiction, household, recreational, school use items. Now, they gather this information on these defects or those potential defects that occur in 3 different ways. One is they're going to ask the manufacturers to keep accurate records and notify them of potential defects and stuff like that regarding safety features of their products, new innovative safety features or modifications that require safety features or stuff like that. And they're going to require those manufacturers to keep accurate records. The other 2 ways they're going to do it is they're going to collect injury reports. If a consumer is injured by a specific product, then there's going to be an injury report filed with the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And it does it in 2 different ways. Now, these 2 different ways have been on previous exams before in a memorization standpoint. One of the previous students I had kind of has one of those Spencer Reed memories. It can memorize everything. It could almost verbatim write down questions. I never wanted her to do that but she did give me a couple ideas, and this is years ago, but she did give me a couple ideas on how questions were phrased, and I was able to make up my own questions on it. But anyway, the difference between the Injury Information Clearinghouse and the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System towards the mid-top of page 192 of your text is the Injury Information Clearinghouse analyzes consumer product injury reports that are filed with the Consumer Product Safety Commission directly. The ones that go through hospitals, i.e. the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System, and I would know that as a maybe acronym as well, the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System analyzes reports of product defects or potential defects associated products because of hospital visits or hospital stays. The hospital basically sends that report out. It gets data from hospital visits for stuff like that, and that goes through the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So 2 ways to get injury reports associated. One is to file directly with the Consumer Product Safety Commission, CPSC, and then also through the hospitals. Okay? Once they have the defective products, they can release the information to the public about those defects. They can force a correction to be done. They can ask for a recall, recall the product until it's fixed, or they can remove the product completely from the marketplace, i.e. lawn darts. And he probably went over lawn darts in the video. Other ones on page 193 of your study guide are Thomas and Friends wooden toy trains, Bucky balls, Bucky cubes, whatever those are. But those are some examples along with lawn darts being the biggest one there. All right. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is also going to require that they test the product, and if it is defective, we're going to require labeling standards, performance standards on what it can do, the labeling standards requiring warning labels to be put on products. And once those warning labels are put on products, it allows a manufacturer to somewhat avoid liability under that assumption of risk that we talked about at the end of chapter 5, because if you fail to heed the warning label, that is the assumption of risk doctrine that can be used. Okay? The last thing is I skipped over, was on page 191 study guide, and I just realized I skipped over it, is the Consumer Product Safety Commission is an independent regulatory agency. We already went over that. 5-member panel appointed by the president. They serve 7-year staggered terms. No more than 3 can be from same political party. That's that apolitical neutrality that I talked about in part 1 material early on. Okay? So those are often, that's the little part about Consumer Product Safety Commission. That doesn't mean that someone comes up every year. It's a 5-member panel. They serve 7-year terms, staggered. So yes, it does come up every once in a while, but it doesn't come up yearly. Independent, economy-wide, administrative agency. Apolitical neutrality, that is on the top, middle top of page 191 of your study. Okay, we are now done with chapter 6. We're going to go over a few of the questions that are pretty decent in the back. I think all of these are fairly easy, really, really easy. And I think you could modify them up a little bit. But going to page 197 of your study guide, question number 3 would be an excellent question. Which is an example of an independent agency? And remember, board or commission. So all of those end with a C or a B, board or commission. If it started with a department or administration, then it's likely going to be dependent or executive, correct? The number 5, when you talk about regular socially conscious error and stuff like that, you need to know which errors comes into play. That is number 5. Number 9 is a good question. Removed from the marketplace by the FDA. You know it was the FDA, so you know that would be silicone breast implants. Notice A is tan M&Ms. That would have been red M&Ms if it was a manufacturer. Lawn darts by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Silicone breast implants by the FDA. Asked specifically about the FDA. So D would be a good answer there. Okay. Number 10 is just, did you memorize that list on investigatory powers and enforcement powers from the early part of the chapter as well? Number 14 would be a good one, combining regulatory agencies during a certain era. The Kefauver-Harris deals with drug effectiveness, not only drug safety, but we already know with drug safety, drug effectiveness as well. Safe and effective for use. We're adding on the effectiveness for 15. Number 18 is good. Number 19 is good at the very end. You'll notice that numbers 18, 19, I think it was number, let's see, number 14. Oh, and number 13 is good with the reasons why the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed as well, also known as the Wiley Act, and I would note that. But those independent, dependent eras and all that stuff, all of those like number 14, 14, 18, 19, you may have 4 or 5 of those on the exam, so you need to be prepared for that. You need to know that sheet, FDA timeline, and anything that we discussed, like the wheat checks, rice checks might be as well. And more importantly, for the first part, you need to know that chart on the bottom of that lime green page. All right. This is the end of chapter 6. You should have 2 smaller videos on FDA Consumer Product Safety Commission, and then 1 slightly longer video dealing with the first part, the historical part of the administrative agency creation, that are going to be combined to be chapter 6. So we have basically the first half on 1 video, then you have the FDA on 2 separate videos because I want to make sure that it didn't get cut off. And so you have 1 dealing with going over the purple sheet and 1 going over the actual study guide associated to the FDA Consumer Product Safety Commission. So now we're done with chapter 6. The next videos will be antitrust law.